My name is Elena. And on the night my in-laws handed me divorce papers, they also introduced the woman who was supposed to replace me. She was already seated at the table when I arrived. I noticed her the way you notice a wrong note in a familiar song. Not loudly, not immediately, but with that quiet internal register that tells you something has shifted. She sat across from my usual chair, wearing cream silk, her dark hair swept back from a face that had clearly never been measured and found wanting. She smiled at me when I sat down, warm and practiced. I smiled back. But before we continue, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell us your time and location in the comments. I had learned in 2 years of Voss family dinners that smiling was the safest currency. Her name, I would learn, was Camille Laurent. And she had not been invited to dinner. She'd been installed. I didn't know that yet. I only knew that my father-in-law Victor was watching me with the particular attention of a man waiting for a reaction, and that my mother-in-law Lydia's composure had that extra layer of deliberate calm she only applied when she was managing something. And I knew that Adrian, my husband of 2 years, was sitting beside me without having touched my hand once since I'd walked in. That, more than anything, told me the shape of the evening. I picked up my wine glass. I waited. Victor cleared his throat. A folder slid across the white linen toward me. "Since you failed to give this family an heir," he said, "we've made a decision for you." I looked at the folder. I did not touch it. And I already knew, in the bone-deep way the body understands things before the mind agrees, exactly what was inside. "The terms are generous," Lydia added. "Pleasant. Final." The tone of a woman who has already moved on to the next item on the agenda. Camille said nothing. She looked at her plate with the careful neutrality of someone who had been briefed on tonight's program and was waiting for her cue. I sat very still, and then I did something none of them expected. I smiled. Not the careful, accommodating smile. Not the one I'd spent 2 years perfecting in that house. Something quieter. Something that came from a place they had never had access to. "Thank you," I said. "I've been waiting for this conversation." Nobody spoke. I reached for my fork. "Shall we eat first?" "I need to take you back." "Not far, just far enough. My name is Elena. 2 years ago, I married Adrian Voss in a ceremony that cost more than my parents' house, in front of 200 people I mostly didn't know, wearing a dress his mother had opinions about. I want to be honest, I loved him. I think that matters because everything that comes after is easier to understand if you know it started with something real. He was warm and private, funny in the dry, understated way that only reveals itself slowly. He remembered details, the name of my university supervisor, the anniversary of my mother's death, how I took my coffee on hard mornings versus easy ones. He was also, I would come to understand, a man who had mastered the art of being present without being accountable. His family was another country entirely. So Victor Voss built his wealth in private equity, the kind that doesn't publicize itself, that moves in the background of things, that prefers influence to visibility. He was not a cruel man in the way cruelty is usually recognized. He was simply a man for whom other people were, fundamentally, instruments. You were useful or you were a liability. There was no third category. Lydia was more sophisticated. She worked with warmth the way a sculptor works with clay, shaping it, applying it precisely, always in service of an outcome you didn't see coming until it had already arrived. And then there was the family's obsession, legacy, bloodline, and heir. I had understood from our first dinner that this was the lens through which I would always be evaluated, not as a person, not as Adrian's partner, but as a vessel for continuity, one of function to be performed. I told myself I could manage it. I told myself that Adrian and I were separate from his family, that what existed between us was ours, protected. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know how wrong until much later. It started the way all slow erosions start. too gradually to name. A comment from Lydia at Sunday breakfast. I hope you two aren't waiting too long. These things become more complicated with time. Delivered with her coffee cup raised, eyes on the window, as if it were barely worth saying. I let it pass. A brochure, 3 weeks later, left on the kitchen counter of Voss House, the estate where we spent most weekends because Adrian's family had a way of filling the calendar that left little room for resistance. The brochure was for a fertility clinic. No note, just the thing itself, sitting beside my keys. I picked it up, put it in my bag, said nothing, then the appointment. Lydia told me she'd arranged it just to rule things out. Her phrase smooth and reasonable on the surface, with the implication underneath that there were things to rule out, that I was the natural place to start looking. I went because I was a rational woman and because some part of me wanted answers as much as they wanted a reason. The tests found nothing. I was healthy, completely, perfectly, pointlessly healthy. I came back with the results and Adrian said, "See? Nothing to worry about," and kissed my forehead, and the conversation was over. That was when I first understood that his comfort was more important to him than my truth. The second appointment was 6 weeks later, then a third, each arranged by Lydia, all each attended by me alone, each returning the same result. By the third one, the doctor had started looking at me with a particular kind of clinical sympathy that made me feel simultaneously over-examined and completely invisible. After the third appointment, I came home and sat at our kitchen table for a long time. Adrian came in, saw my face, sat across from me. "Hey," he said, "you okay?" "I think your mother should stop arranging these appointments," I said carefully. "The results are consistent. There's nothing wrong with me." He was quiet for a moment, then, "She just wants to help. She's worried." "She's not worried about me, Adrian. Elena, she's worried about the bloodline." I kept my voice level. "And every time I sit in that clinic alone while your family waits for a result that will tell them whose fault this is, I feel like—" I stopped, pressed my hands flat on the table. "I feel like a problem you're trying to solve." He looked at me with the expression that I had once read as sensitivity and was beginning to read as something else. The look of a man calculating the least costly response. "You're not a problem," he said. "You're my wife. I love you. Then tell your mother to stop." A pause, long enough to mean something. "She means well," he said. "Just give it a little more time. Please." I looked at him across the table. He reached over and covered my hand with his. I let him, and I hated myself a little for letting him. What I want you to understand is that it didn't feel like gaslighting at the time. That is the nature of it. It arrives wearing the clothes of love, of reasonableness, of patience. 3 months after that conversation, nothing had changed. The appointments had paused, but the pressure had simply changed form. Now it lived in looks exchanged across tables, in Lydia's careful silences, in Victor's quarterly check-ins with Adrian that always seemed to leave my husband quieter, more sealed off for days afterward, and increasingly it lived in the things Adrian said to me, small things, the kind that don't register as damage until they've accumulated. "You've been very stressed lately. That affects the body, you know." I know my mother is a lot, but she's from a different generation. I try to be patient. "Maybe if you took some time off work, the studio is demanding and you take everything so personally." That last one arrived on a Tuesday night after I'd come home tired from a difficult restoration project and made the mistake of telling him I felt unseen. "I take things personally," I repeated. "I just mean—" He set down his glass carefully. "You've been carrying a lot of anxiety about all of this, and anxiety affects fertility. It's documented. I'm not blaming you. I'm trying to help." I looked at him for a long moment. "Are you telling me this is my fault because I'm anxious?" "I'm not saying that." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying—" He pressed his fingertips to his forehead in the gesture that meant, "I'm trying to be patient with you." "I'm saying maybe we should look at this from every angle. That's all." I went to bed that night and lay in the dark, replaying the conversation, turning it over, trying to find where I had misunderstood. This is what extended manipulation does. It makes you the investigator of your own perception. I spent an hour wondering if he was right, if I was anxious, if anxiety was the variable nobody had tested yet. By 2 a.m, I had almost convinced myself. At 2:15, I thought about the brochures, the appointments arranged without my input, the ways my body had been made into a topic of family discussion before it was ever a conversation between my husband and me. I stopped wondering if he was right. I started wondering what he was hiding. She appeared for the first time 6 weeks before the dinner. Lydia introduced her at a small gathering, a family friend just in from Paris, with the warm, offhand ease of someone placing something new in a room and waiting to see if anyone notices. I noticed. Camille Laurent was the kind of woman the Voss family would have designed if they'd been given the specifications. Old money in her posture, effortless in the way that requires significant effort to maintain. She spoke 4 languages. This came up within the first 20 minutes, organically, and which meant it had been engineered, and had the serene self-possession of someone who had never once been made to feel like a problem. She was also very careful around me. Not unfriendly, not obvious, but careful. The way people are careful when they've been told something about a situation and are trying not to let it show. I watched her over the course of that evening. Once, near the end of the night, she drifted toward the window where I was standing. We talked for a few minutes about art. She had opinions about Viennese modernism, not unintelligent ones. Then she said with a kind of practiced delicacy, "Adrian speaks very highly of you." Present tense. But something in the construction, speaks, not has spoken, not always says, that implied recent conversation, a conversation in which I had been a subject. Does he?" I said. She smiled, took a sip of her wine, and gracefully moved away. I stood at the window and understood, with cold precision, exactly what I was looking at. I was being previewed. She was being positioned. And somewhere in the house behind me, my husband and his family had already moved several steps ahead of me on a board I hadn't known I was playing. I called Nina the next morning. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been expecting me. "Tell me," she said. I told her everything. Camille, the gathering, the careful choreography of it all, the feeling. And I was precise about this, because Nina didn't traffic in feelings that weren't grounded in something observable. The feeling that I was watching the end of my marriage being quietly assembled around me while I was still inside it. Nina listened without interrupting, which was how I knew she was taking it seriously. When she spoke, her voice had the clipped focus of a woman shifting into problem-solving mode. "Has Adrian ever been tested?" she asked. The question landed differently than I expected. They never suggested it. Of course they didn't. A pause. "Elena, I've been thinking about something since you first told me about the appointments. Adrian is 41. He was in a serious relationship before you. The one he doesn't discuss in detail. It ended because she wanted children, right? He said he wasn't ready. That's one explanation." I didn't respond. "I'm not saying anything yet," Nina said carefully. "I'm saying there's a question that nobody has asked. And I think it should be asked? How?" A short silence. "Let me look into something," she said. "Don't confront anyone. Don't change anything. Just give me a few days." I gave her 4. She called on a Thursday evening. I was in the studio, alone, working on a damaged panel from a 19th century altarpiece, restoring the face of a saint whose features had been obscured by 200 years of varnish and neglect. "Sit down," Nina said. "I'm already sitting." 7 years ago, she said, Adrian Voss had a vasectomy at a private clinic in Geneva. Elective, fully documented. I set down my brush. 7 years ago. 2 years before he met you. I looked at the saint's half-restored face on the panel in front of me. He knew, I said. Not a question. He is known for every single appointment you sat through, every test, every Sunday dinner where his mother looked at you like, Nina, I know. Send me everything. Already in your email. I ended the call, sat in the quiet of the studio, the smell of mineral spirits and old wood, and the particular silence of a room full of things that had survived longer than anyone expected. I thought about Adrian's hand covering mine at the kitchen table. You're not a problem. I love you. I thought about every appointment, every result, every careful, loving suggestion that perhaps I was the variable, that perhaps my anxiety, my stress, my failure to relax into the life they'd designed for me was the reason this family didn't have what it wanted. I thought about 2 years of that. And then I thought about what I was going to do with it. I picked up my brush, and I went back to work. I want to tell you about the moment I almost broke early. It was 10 days before the dinner. I had the vasectomy records. I had the timeline. I had Nina's documentation. And I had come home from the studio to find Adrian on the phone in his study, the door half open, his voice low and urgent. I stopped in the hallway. I heard, "She doesn't know anything. Just keep it together until..." Then he turned, saw me through the gap in the door. There was a moment, half a second, maybe less, where everything in his face was visible, caught, genuine. Then it closed. He said something into the phone, quickly, and ended the call. Came to the door, leaned against the frame with the practiced ease of a man who had been managing his expressions his whole life. "Hey, how was the studio?" I looked at him. "She doesn't know anything." I could have said it then. Could have walked into that study and placed everything I had on his desk and watched his face do the thing it had just done. Open, exposed, unable to manage itself fast enough. But I thought about Lydia, about Victor, about the machine of this family, the way it operated, the way a confrontation in private would be absorbed and rerouted and lawyered into a narrative I had no control over. I wanted control. "Long day," I said. "I'm going to shower." I walked past him down the hall. He watched me go. I felt it. I did not turn around. 3 days later, Lydia came to the city apartment. When she let herself in, she had a key, another thing I had permitted without thinking, another small surrender, and sat at my kitchen table as if she'd been invited. "I want to speak with you privately," she said, woman to woman. I made tea, set a cup in front of her, sat across from her. "I know this has been difficult," she said. Her voice was softer than usual, calibrated for intimacy. This was Lydia's most dangerous register, the one that felt like understanding. "I want you to know that I don't blame you. Some things simply aren't meant to be, and there is no weakness in acknowledging that." I wrapped my hands around my cup. "Adrian loves you," she continued, "but he has responsibilities that extend beyond what either of you feel for each other. The Voss name means something. The continuation of this family means something, and we cannot..." She paused, choosing her next word with the care of someone placing a blade. "Sacrifice that continuation for sentiment." "Is that what I am?" I asked. "Sentiment?" "You are a woman with a great deal to offer," she said, "to someone else, in a life that fits you better than this one." I looked at her across the table. This woman who had arranged appointments for my body, who had introduced a replacement at a dinner party, who had, in 2 years, never once asked me a question about myself that wasn't in service of evaluating my usefulness. "Thank you for coming," I said. She seemed satisfied, rose from the table, collected her bag. At the door, she paused. "I hope we can handle the coming weeks with grace, for everyone's sake." "I'm counting on it," I said. She left. I went to my bag and turned off the small recorder I had placed inside it when I heard her key in the lock. I had been waiting for her to come. My own doctor's appointment had been scheduled for weeks. Routine. A simple check-in with my GP, the kind I maintained with the disciplined regularity of a woman who had learned not to trust other people to manage her health for her. I went on a Wednesday, alone, as I did everything medical now. I sat in the examination room in my work clothes and gave blood and answered questions and thought about the altarpiece in the studio, about the area near the saint's left shoulder that still needed work. The results arrived by secure message 3 days before the dinner. I opened the notification on my phone in the studio, between coats of varnish. I read it once. Then I sat very still for what felt like a long time. Positive. The word didn't process immediately. When it did, my first thought was, that's impossible. My second thought was the timeline. 6 weeks ago, the night in the countryside, away from Voss House and the calendar and the accumulated weight of the life we'd built in the wreckage of honest conversation. A night when something between us had loosened briefly, when he had been, for a few hours, the man I had married rather than the one I had been managing ever since. I thought about the medical literature on vasectomy reversal, about the small but documented percentage of cases in which the procedure reversed spontaneously over time, about what 7 years meant, statistically. And then, slowly, with the particular dark humor that arrives when irony becomes too enormous to process any other way, I began to understand what I was holding. The Voss family had spent 2 years demanding an heir. The heir existed, and I was the only person in the world who knew it. I sat in the studio with that knowledge for 3 days. I did not call Adrian. I did not call Nina. I added it to my folder, and I waited for dinner. I arrived at Voss House at 7. I wore the navy silk, the diamond earrings Adrian had given me, his taste, his gift, now my armor. My hair was pinned, my bag contained everything I needed, my face contained nothing I didn't intend. The candles were lit. Of course they were. Camille was already seated. Of course she was. I took my place beside Adrian. He kissed my cheek in greeting, the brief automatic press of a man going through the forms of a marriage he had privately already exited. I smelled his cologne. I thought, I know you. I know exactly who you are. And tonight, so will everyone else. Dinner began. I was charming. I asked Victor about a business matter he'd mentioned the previous week. He liked that, liked being listened to, and watched his slight surprise that I'd remembered. I complimented the wine. I asked Camille something polite about Paris. She answered carefully, watching me the way she'd watched me at the previous gathering that contained alertness. Partway through the main course, she said something that confirmed everything. We were discussing a development project, something architectural, something Victor had raised, and Camille offered an opinion, knowledgeable, specific, not the kind of familiarity that doesn't come from one dinner party. She caught herself a half-beat too late. I saw it. The micro-adjustment, the slight rerouting. She'd been briefed on the family's business interests. That kind of detail is not given to family friends, just in from Paris. It is given to successors. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip. There it is. Victor waited until the plates were cleared. Then he looked at me with the expression I had catalogued over 2 years, the one that meant he was about to say something he considered inevitable. Elena. I set down my dessert fork. We've been patient, he said. The family has been patient, but patience has a horizon, and we have reached it. He nodded. The folder appeared, slid across the linen. The terms are fair, Lydia said. More than fair, given the circumstances. I looked at the folder. I looked at Camille. I looked at Adrian, who was staring at the table in front of him with the intense focus of a man who has decided that if he doesn't meet anyone's eyes, he is not truly present for what is happening. Adrian, I said quietly. He looked up. Anything you'd like to say? A long pause, the kind that answers the question. Elena, he started. No, I said. I didn't think so. I reached into my bag. I placed my folder on the table beside theirs. I opened it. The first document, the vasectomy record, clinic letterhead, date, his name in the patient field, clean, clear, irrefutable. I slid it to the center of the table. The room changed. Not loudly. The change was almost internal. A collective intake of something that wasn't quite breath. Victor's eyes dropped to the paper, and something moved across his face that I had never seen there before. The specific blankness of a man whose certainty has been removed without warning. Lydia's composure didn't shatter. It simply stopped, like a clock that has been unplugged. Adrian made a sound. "This is from a clinic in Geneva," I said. My voice was steady. I had practiced steadiness for 2 years. Now it was simply mine. 7 years ago, before he met me. Silence. "Every appointment your family arranged for me," I continued. "Every test, every Sunday afternoon where I sat at this table while you looked at me as if I were a malfunction. He knew. He has known from the first one." "That's," Victor began. "Documented," I said. "Verified by a second physician, and should anyone wish to contest it, my lawyer has the originals." I reached into the folder. "There's one more thing." I placed the second document beside the first. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Camille Laurent looked at the table. Lydia looked at me. Victor looked at Adrian. And Adrian, my husband, who had sat beside me for 2 years while his family carved me into a failure, who had held my hand and said, "I love you," and chosen, every single time, the path that cost him least. Adrian looked at me with the expression of a man finally understanding the shape of what he had done. "The vasectomy reversed," I said, "spontaneously. It happens." I paused. The irony isn't lost on me. I let that sit in the room. Then I looked at Victor. Straight. Level. "You have been waiting 2 years for an heir," I said. "There is one. And I will not allow this child, your grandchild, to grow up in a family that spent those 2 years making their mother feel like a defect." I closed my folder. "The divorce is fine. I won't contest it. My lawyer will be in touch about the terms. They will be different from what is in your folder." I looked at Lydia. "What you said to me in my apartment 3 weeks ago is recorded. Legally. I'd encourage care in how this next phase is managed." I looked at Camille. She met my eyes briefly. Something in hers that might have been, if I was reading it right, a kind of reluctant respect. And then I looked at Adrian one final time. "I hope," I said quietly, "that one day you find the courage to be honest, if not for my sake, for theirs." I nodded at the table, at the folder, and at the documents that now sat between us like the ruins of everything we had built on nothing. Then I stood up, I picked up my bag, and I walked out of Voss House for the last time. I did not slam the door. I closed it quietly. I have always believed that the quiet ones land harder. Nina was parked at the bottom of the drive. She had been there since 8:30. I got in. She looked at me. The full inventory she always takes. The one that has nothing to do with how I look and everything to do with whether I'm still standing. "How are you?" I thought about it. Honestly. "Lighter," I said. She started the car. We drove through the gates without speaking. I watched Voss House disappear in the side mirror, and I felt something I had not expected. Not triumph, not relief, something quieter. And the particular quiet of a decision finally made that you have been circling for longer than you admitted. I was 34 years old, pregnant, and at the beginning of something I couldn't name yet. That felt against all logic like enough. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. The terms were mine. Victor had not contested them. The recorded conversation with Lydia, combined with the vasectomy documentation, had given my lawyer what she described as considerable leverage. The settlement was fair. More than fair. I accepted it without drama, because I had not come into this for money and I was not going to let money become the story. The story was already the story. I kept the city apartment. I went back to the studio on Tuesday mornings. I let the work be what it had always been. Slow, honest, requiring the kind of attention that cannot be faked. In the spring, I had a daughter, Clara. It means bright, clear. I held her in the first hours and understood, with the total simplicity of things that are true, that every single thing I had survived to get to that room had been worth surviving. I did not reach toward Adrian. I left that door in the position it had always been, his to open, if he could find the courage. For Clara's sake, not mine. I was done building things for people who left me the labor. Victor and Lydia did not contact me. I had not expected them to. 8 months after the divorce was finalized, Adrian called. I saw his name on my phone and felt nothing urgent. The grief had moved, the way grief does when you've actually processed it into something quieter, a scar, not a wound. I answered, Elena. His voice was careful. I've been thinking about calling for a long time. I know. A pause. Can I see her? I told you through the lawyer that access was available to you if you wanted it. The offer stands. I meant both of you. I wanted to... He stopped, started differently. I've been doing a lot of thinking about everything I didn't say, everything I should have done. Adrian. I know I don't deserve... Adrian. My voice was gentle. I meant it to be. I was not angry anymore. Anger is expensive, and I had reclaimed the budget. You have a daughter. That door is open because she deserves to know her father, and her father deserves the chance to be present if he chooses it. But that door and this one... I paused. They are not the same door. Silence. What we had is done, I said. Not because I can't forgive you. I think eventually I can. But because I have spent 2 years learning what it costs to stay in a version of my life that was built around someone else's comfort. I am not available for that anymore. I understand, he said quietly. Good. Another silence. Then, she's beautiful. The photo you sent through the lawyer. She looks like you. Something moved in my chest. Brief. Human. She does, I said. Call the lawyer, set up a time. Come and meet her properly. Okay? Adrian? Yeah. Come as her father, I said. Not as someone trying to find a way back to me. She'll know the difference. Children always do. I ended the call. Sat for a moment in the quiet of my apartment, my things, my life arranged the way I had arranged it, without consultation or compromise. Clara was asleep in the next room. I could hear the small, even rhythm of her breathing through the monitor. I thought about the woman I had been 2 years ago, sitting at a dinner table, smiling at nothing in particular, absorbing the weight of a lie she didn't know was a lie yet. I thought about the envelope of divorce papers, the woman in the cream dress, the folder slid across white linen. I thought about what it had cost to stay quiet long enough to gather the truth. And then I thought about this, the studio in the mornings, Clara's face, Nina's voice on the phone, the specific, uncomplicated satisfaction of a Tuesday when the work goes well and the light comes through the window and nothing is required of me except to pay attention. This is enough, I thought. This is everything. I had thought it once before, in a different life, about a different kind of love. The difference was, this time I was right. If you liked this story, please support us by subscribing and liking, and kindly drop a comment on your time and location. Thank you.